Good evening, everybody. Welcome, everyone, to Thursday Night Bible Study, Deep Calls to Deep. I'm D.G. Farmer, and we are studying through the book of Judges. Tonight we are in Judges chapter 7. So before we begin today, let's go to the Lord in prayer and ask His blessing on tonight's study. You're welcome. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for your word. And we just thank you for the ability that we have to come together and study tonight and look again at the book of Judges and try to just see how you worked amongst your people and to put applications to work in our own lives, Lord. And we just thank you that we have the freedom in this country to come together the many days of the week that we have to just to study and to get together as a body and just encourage one another and just be encouraged by your word as well. So thanks again for this study. Thanks again for your people who have come out tonight to the church, and those who are at home. Just open up their hearts and minds tonight to your word. I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. Last week, we were introduced to our sixth Shofet, Gideon. Now, we found our hero hiding in a wine press, threshing wheat for two reasons. One, being the youngest brother, he always got the worst duty. And this would have been a tedious and arduous task that no one wanted. We talked about last week how this would have taken a very long time to get just a little amount to provide for his family. So nobody wanted that duty, and so Gideon got that duty. We talked about the wine press was a hard surface, but way too small for threshing wheat. Two, it was the wheat harvest, and these patrolling bands of Midianites were in the land for the 8th straight season to devour all of Israel's produce. So if caught, any grain would have been immediately confiscated. This means that his family would not eat. What he and the others of his tribe did not know was that God was disciplining these northern tribes for their idolatry. Again. That word again, right? They won't learn. But the good news is that they weren't all blind, because somebody among them was praying and humbling themselves before the Lord. We don't know who, but somebody was. Usually we call those people the remnant, right? The remnant was praying. As a result, the Lord was going to raise up another judge to deliver them from Midian. 7 years they had oppressed Israel, and things were very dire. We talked about the circumstances might have been that as bad as a famine. God bless you. And so things were really, really bad. Now, what interesting leadership choices God makes, as the scripture says, but God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things which are strong. That's from 1 Corinthians 1:27. Gideon was seen as neither wise or strong by himself, his family, or his clan. But God was going to use this young man with his faulty beliefs and syncretistic doctrines. He was going to patiently and lovingly work within the beliefs and customs of the day to accomplish his greater good. he was also going to overlook some major problems that Gideon had with faith and trust, as Gideon simply didn't understand how to identify, respond, or interact with God. Despite all this, the angel of the Lord greeted Gideon with, "Oh, valiant warrior." Now, we discussed how amazing it is that God always sees us for what he created us to be and not what we can see of ourselves outwardly. He sees us in the light of our future in his kingdom. Praise the Lord for that. The Lord, having Gideon's full attention, gives him specific instructions. Gideon obeyed the Lord and did the following. He broke down the altar of Baal as his first act of shofet. Then he chopped down the Asherah. Remember, the Asherah was either a tree or a totem pole, usually placed right by the altar to Baal. So he chopped that down. Then he built another altar to the Lord on top, and using the Asherah as firewood, he sacrificed his father's exalted bull. These were all very brave acts, but we learn he did them at night. So when the leading men of the town found out that their holy site was desecrated, they flew into a rage and found out that it was Joash's son who was the culprit. They wanted Gideon put to death, adding murder to their list of crimes, which included idolatry. Joash, who couldn't have been very happy with his son at this point in time, right, saved him by claiming that anyone who feels that Baal ought to be put Baal's power into question. Well, this was enough to get the men to back down, and from this day forward, Gideon was called by a new name, Jerubbaal, which means let or Baal fighter. Now, we discussed last week how Gideon seemed to be on shaky ground throughout this whole. He was just at that wine press, probably in June, and it has been mere weeks since. So he was not seeing better. I don't know what's going on with this.
I'm going to use this also. Do you want me to just put it on a stand?
Yeah. It's coming in and out. I don't know why. Just in case. Thank you. So just to make sure it wasn't all a dream, Gideon gave God the fleece test. Now, even though I want us to be empathetic to Gideon and understanding of the pressures he must have faced, I believe we should in no way hold this action up as nothing more than Gideon's struggle with his flesh against the power of the Spirit newly given to him. We should not use the fleece test to determine God's will. But, like Gideon, we need to trust in his very words. We have the same struggle on a daily basis as Gideon does. Are we going to trust God's promises or not? During these difficult times, this is our challenge. So let's move on. That was last week. Let's move on to Judges chapter 7. So let's turn to Judges chapter 7. And I'm going to read the first 8 verses tonight. Judges chapter 7. Then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him, rose early and camped beside the spring of Harod. And the camp of Midian was on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. The Lord said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to give Midian into their hands. For Israel will become boastful, saying, my own power has delivered me. Now therefore come, proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, whoever is afraid and trembling, let him return and depart from Mount Gilead. So 22,000 people returned, but 10,000 remained. Then the Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. Therefore it shall be that he of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, he shall go with you. But every one of whom I say to you, this one shall not go with you, he shall not go. So he brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, you shall separate everyone who laps the water with his tongue as a dog laps, as well as everyone who kneels to drink. Now, the number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people kneeled to drink water. The Lord said to Gideon, I will deliver you with the 300 men who lapped, and will give the Midianites into your hands. So let all the other people go, each man to his home. So the 300 men took the people's provisions and their trumpets into their hands. And Gideon sent all the other men of Israel, each to his tent, but retained the 300 men, and the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. In verse 1, it describes where Gideon's camp and the Midianites' camps were located. Gideon and his men were at the foot of Mount Gilead, it says. Now, this is right by the spring of Harod. Now, the spring of Harod is right at the foot of actually Mount Gilboa. So, the thought is that Mount Gilead is actually a scribal error. They made a mistake. The other possible explanation could be that part of the mountain also was nicknamed at this point in time Mount Gilead. Either way, this is the modern-day Mount Gilboa, which you'll see up there on the map. And there was a spring right at its foot, right at the bottom of the mount. And the Midianites were camped on and around the hill of Moreh. Now, both of these camps were inside the Jezreel Valley. So let me just show the map to you and describe what you're looking at here. All right. So you remember last battle took place in the Jezreel Valley, right? And if you look over on this side, or we look over on this side on the other map, right? We had Harosheth Hagoyim. That's where Sisera drove his 300 chariots. Remember that city was on the western side, just about at the Mediterranean Sea. And you remember he rode down the Jezreel Valley, which pretty much travels south and east. All right, and he traveled from Harosheth, and he went down the Kishon River, and right at the foot of Mount Tabor he stopped, and that's basically where the battle took place. Now, if you continue southeast towards the Jordan River a little while, you're going to get to the area where they were camped. So on the southeastern end of the Jezreel Valley is where this battle takes place. So past the spot where Deborah and Barak met Sisera, you keep going southeast, and you're going to get to this spot. Now, you see on the map, and I put on the map down below, that's Mount Gilboa, and that's where the Israelites were camped. And on the downslope there, you see the spring. And then if you go across the Jezreel Valley, just a hop, skip, and a jump, they were not too far from each other. That other mountain, that's the hill of Moreh. All right, and that up there, up at the top where the lines kind of end, that's where the enemy camp was. Can you see? So Israel to the south, and you have the Midianites to the north. Just a few miles with the valley in between. All right, so that gives us kind of idea of what's going on here. So The battle does not begin well for Gideon and his army. Outnumbered already, the Lord informs him that there were too many men for Israel. God explains that he does not want them to become boastful and claim this victory. The victory is God's alone. Now, God seems to be making a point with his people that victory is always his. Remember, we talked about this in Judges 3, verses 1 and 2. You'll recall these verses. Now these are the nations that the Lord left to test Israel by them, that is, all the Israelites who had not experienced any of the wars of Canaan, only in order that the generations of the sons of Israel might be taught war, those who had not experienced it previously. Now, I said then, and I'll repeat this point again, God was not just wanting his people to be trained in warcraft, learning to defend themselves, although that obviously was one of the points that why the Lord allowed this to happen. You know, in Israel's history, moving forward, they were going to have to know how to defend themselves. So obviously that was part of the reason. They needed to know how to defend themselves, and they were going to get that experience here. But he was teaching them that when it comes to holy war, they needed to have complete trust in him for the victory. I think that was another major point. There was both a physical, right, being trained in war, and the all-important spiritual side of holy war. So the spiritual side is this dependence and total trust in God for him to go before them and for him to win the battle. So he tells Gideon to speak to his army and say that whoever is afraid should depart and go home. Well, he started with 32,000 soldiers. 22,000 depart, leaving only 10,000. Now, this also was a keeping in God's law of warfare. This law of warfare is found in Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 8. And this is what it says. Then the officers shall speak further to the people and say, who is a man that is afraid and faint-hearted? Let him depart and return to his house, so that he might not make his brothers' hearts melt like his heart. So the idea behind Deuteronomy 28 is a very practical one. Fear can cripple an army. I mean, fear is contagious. Therefore, it was better to move forward with those ready to fight without fear. Now, I mean this in a general sense because we know, and all those who may know about war, is that all soldiers have some amount of fear when facing any army in battle. Fear is normal and natural. This is not the fear that it's talking about here. This is talking about the kind of fear that stops you from thinking straight, right? And that causes others in the battle to have fear as well. This is the kind of fear that spreads, that's contagious, that is bad for any army. And so in keeping with Deuteronomy 28, 22,000 went home. Then the Lord creates a second test that will further thin their numbers. He tells Gideon to bring them down to the water, the spring of Harod, and whoever lapped the water like a dog was to depart, and those who cupped the water, bringing it to their mouth, could stay. Okay? So, Pastor George, you have the spring of Harod up there? There's the spring of Harod. As you can see, when you come by the water, you have to kneel. So let me give you an idea of how this worked. As they lined up to get a drink, those who just put their face down to the water, all right, and lapped it up like this, those are the ones who were let go. But the ones who grabbed the water and brought it to their mouth, those are the ones who the Lord had to stay. And that was 300 out of the 10,000. All right? So a bulk of everyone put their face to the water, right? And just lapped it up like a dog. The rest used their hands and brought it to their mouth. So this would show, by them bringing that to their mouth, that who was naturally more alert and watchful. And that was the idea. So now the 10,000 turns to 300. Now, these numbers must have highly disturbed Gideon, right? This is the man who needed all those encouragements just to step up as a judge. And just prior to this, he needed to perform a fleece test. So I can imagine in Gideon's heart, who's needed this kind of encouragement, as he's down to 300 men. He started with 32,000 volunteers, and now his army is 300, just 1% of the original. But they were just the right amount for God. In other words, God has them right where he wants them. Psalm 33:16 says this, "The king is not saved by a mighty army. A mighty warrior is not delivered by great strength." So, who is the deliverer of God's people? God is. This battle is one of many in which God instructed his leaders to do something counterintuitive, like Deborah and Barak, as they marched down into the teeth of Sisera's army. Remember, they were safe up on the mountain. God tells them to go down. So they're gonna march right on down, right into this 900 chariot army, when the safety was up on Mount Tabor, right? And so God does this. He wants you to know, and he wants his people to know, the battle is mine, without a doubt. So once again, this is counterintuitive. 32,000 goes down to 22,000, it goes down to 10,000, 10,000 to 300. Now, the Lord, always the teacher, is looking for ways to show us that no victory, big or small, is guaranteed without him. So in verse 8, before they departed, those leaving gave the 300 their shofars, so that all 300 had one. And we're going to go over the battle, and that'll make sense in a second. Any questions over the first 8 verses? Any comments? Okay, I'm going to read verses 9 through 15. Part 2. Okay, now, the same night, this is the same night where everyone went home, went back to their tent, and they were stuck with just the 300. The same night, it came about that the Lord said to him, "Arise, go down against the camp, for I have given it into your hands. But if you are afraid to go down, go with Purah, your servant, down to the camp. And you will hear what they say, and afterward your hands will be strengthened, that you may go down against the camp." So he went with Purah, his servant, down to the outposts of the army that was in the camp. Now the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the sons of the east were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts, and their camel were without number, as numerous as the sands on the seashore. And when Gideon came, behold, a man was relating a dream to his friend. And he said, "Behold, I had a dream. A loaf of barley bread was tumbling into the camp of Midian. And it came to the tent, and it struck it so that it fell, and turned upside down so that the tent lay flat." And his friend answered and said, "This is nothing less than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given Midian and all the camp into his hand." And it came about when Gideon heard this account of the dream and its interpretation that he bowed in worship. He returned to the camp of Israel and said, "Arise, for the Lord has given the camp of Midian into your hands." Now, once again, God showing patience and understanding. he sends Gideon on a mission to encourage and strengthen his resolve. So what the purpose of this mission was. And I'm not too sure how hard we should be on Gideon. It would still take tremendous faith to press forward under these odds. The opposing army had 135,000 fighting men. And we find that number in Judges 8, verse 10. So this is a 450 to 1 disadvantage. Now, how often we ask God to strengthen our resolve in times of trouble? We do this all the time. And we pray that prayer all the time. Lord, please strengthen me. Things are difficult, and I need a little help. So the Lord, in his great mercy, is giving Gideon this help. He's going to strengthen his resolve. So he told Gideon that he was to venture down to the enemy camp with his servant Purah so that he could hear something God wanted him to hear. The conversation that Gideon and his servant Purah overheard was between two sentries, or night watchmen. Okay, they were the night watchmen who were out guarding the camp. So they're just two buddies at night hanging out, looking out for the camp. They're two sentries. And this would have occurred sometime before 10 p.m. or the middle watch. In verse 19, it says the attack occurred during the middle watch, would have been about 10. So just before 10, somewhere, it would be pitch black. This is when Gideon went down to the camp. So, 9:30-ish is when he went down. So he's listening in, and one claimed that he had a dream that a barley loaf tumbled into the midst of the camp of Midian and flattened a tent. Now, this barley loaf would have been a flat, round bread cooked in a pan, sort of like pita bread, as you see in the picture. All right, so right there you have a barley loaf. What it would look like, it's flat. Standing up on its side, it would roll down the hill like a wheel. Okay, it's not a loaf like we think of a loaf of bread, more square or elongated. All right, so that would have been the barley loaf. It would have been rolling down. Now, barley bread, unlike the much more favorable wheat bread, was representative of the only type of bread that Israel was able to enjoy over the last 7 years because of these invaders. And I really haven't. Now, has anybody ever had barley bread? Just offhand, to ask you a question. Anybody ever have it? I tell you what, I hear barley bread just does not taste very well. I hear the difference between barley bread and wheat bread is there. It's you can taste the difference. Like barley bread is very bitter. It's not very tasty. So it's basically barley was the food of the poor, the very poor. It's healthy, just doesn't taste good. So the wheat harvest is the big harvest. The barley harvest is the first harvest. That happens more in April, March, April. But certainly I have not had a lot of barley bread, but I hear barley bread is not really that good compared to at least regular bread. So it was probably the only bread they can enjoy because they're getting their wheat taken by the invaders. Also, barley had been known to represent Israel, and specifically the poor farmers of Israel. So there is a little representation of this barley loaf coming down, representing Israel and Israel's plight to smash the tent of the Midianites. Now, the friend's interpretation is very key to the rest of the chapter because he says in verse 14, "This is nothing less than the sword of Gideon." And then he mentions that it is Israel's God who has given them the victory. Now, after hearing this, Gideon bows down and worships God and is once again ready to carry out God's will with renewed strength. His God was giving the enemy soldiers dreams. And so this extra strength was given, and Gideon's ready to fight. All right, so let's read what happens after Gideon returns We're going to read verses 16 to the end of the chapter. Does anybody have any questions over the first 15 verses? Anything they've shown you?
Yeah, I do.
Any? All right, Ken.
What happened to, like they started off on 135,000? What happened to them?
135,000, Kenny asked. 135,000 was the enemy. The enemy had 135,000. 32,000. Okay, so he starts out with 32. God says that's too many people. So anybody that's afraid can go, just go, can leave. Right? So when Gideon proposed this question and gives them an out, 22,000 of the 32 just leave. And that is in keeping with actually a law in the book of Deuteronomy. It's part of the Mosaic law that during war, they would offer their soldiers the ability to leave. If they were afraid, you can go. And obviously that was, to keep deserters, and problems in battle, where one soldier would make another soldier fearful and it would spread. So that's part of God's law. So 22,000 went and there 10,000 were left. Still too many for God, because he's going to prove a point in this battle. So they go down to the water, the spring, and they both kneel down, and he asks everyone to go get a drink. And the ones that bowed down and were going like this, right, those are the ones who the Lord kept. And the others just lapped up the water. They weren't very watchful. So the ones that were most watchful, those are the ones that stayed. And so Gideon has his 300. And what we look at this is, and it was a good question, Ken, because it, just to try to give you this panoramic. Sometimes when I'm reading, I don't do this enough. But this is Gideon, who was just threshing wheat in a wine press. And this is not very long after God calls him. And now he's going against 135,000 Midianites who are across the way just a couple of miles, and God has just knocked down his force to 1% of what it once was, and he has 300. And we already know that he had the fleece test. He had a little bit of problem with a little bit of faith. Is it really you, Lord? Is it really you, Lord? And look what the Lord is putting him through. Again, right? You're going to go to battle with my 300. And now everyone's going to know that the victory is the Lord's. But when we do this, and I always ask you guys to do this often, put yourself in their shoes, try to visualize. I don't care if I really believe in Gideon. I'm going to be very scared, frightened. I'm 300 men going against 135,000. So you got to imagine that this is what's going on now. They're going to have to steel themselves. They're resolved. And Gideon's going to have to lead. He's going to have to be firm. Because right now, where we're at now, he goes back to his 300 men, and they're going to go to battle right now. All right? That's what we're going to read about. All right? Rose.
Question.
Sure.
How did the second watchman know to interpret the dream? Was that the Lord who put the interpretation in him?
Absolutely. Yep. That was Gideon knowing that the Lord gave that dream to that man. Right? And when he heard that, obviously the Lord's hand's in all this. And it will come back that when he names Gideon by name, I'll show you why that was important. Not only Gideon hearing that for his next step, but also it'll help you make sense of the battle and kind of what happened, and I'll go over that. All right? All right, let's read verse. Any more questions? Oh, go ahead, Jim.
Hard time visualizing thousands of men at that time of the world. Now, if I saw 100,000 or whatever, I would take it for granted. But in those days, 130,000, I can't.
It was a massive amount of people. They had a ton of camels. In verse 12, and I didn't bring this out in my notes, where it talks about they're without number. That's just a Middle Eastern, that's a way of saying that there was a great number. It's not that you couldn't really number them. It's just that that's a whole lot. So it was a whole lot of people and a whole lot of camels. And they were like locusts. And, 300 men is not a lot. if I'm versing if I'm versing 5 men, then I might be a little confident there. But 300 against 135,000. Okay, so here's what happens after Gideon arrives back. Let's start in verse 16, read to the end of the chapter. Now, he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put trumpets and empty pitchers into the hands of all of them, with torches inside the pitchers. Now he said to them, "Look at me and do likewise. And behold, when I come to the outskirts of the camp, do as I do. When I and all who are with me blow the trumpet, then you also blow the trumpets all around the camp and say, for the Lord and for Gideon." So Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the outskirts of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch. We talked about that. That's 10 p.m. And when they had just posted the watch, and they blew the trumpets and smashed the pitchers that were in their hands. Now, when the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers, they held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands for blowing, and cried, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." So each stood in his place around the camp, and all the army ran, crying out as they fled. And when they blew 300 trumpets, the Lord set the sword of one against another, even throughout the whole army. And the army fled as far as Bethshitta, towards Zerah, as far as the edge of Abel Maholah by Tabbath. The men of Israel were summoned from Naphtali and Asher and all Manasseh, and they pursued Midian. Gideon sent messengers throughout all the hill country of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against Midian and take the waters before them, as far as Beth-barah and the Jordan." So all the men of Ephraim were summoned, and they took the waters as far as Beth-barah and the Jordan. They captured the 2 leaders of Midian, Oreb and Zeb, and they killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and killed Zeb at the winepress of Zeb. And while they pursued Midian, and they brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon from across the Jordan. So, Gideon goes back, and he divides his men into 3 groups of 100. He was going to use the cover of night for a surprise attack as the enemy army either rests or sleeps. Now, all of them have and I'll just go over this, they have a shofar in the right hand. All right? The ram's horn that they blow, a shofar. And a torch that's inside a clay pot in their left hand. Okay? I don't know how they did it. I would assume a clay pot is like this. The torch is kind of hanging in there, and it's aflame. But that's what they have in their left hand. A torch in a clay pot. That's how they march down to the Midianite camp. Now, when they are in position, Gideon and all 300 men blow their shofars, followed by the smashing of the pitchers. This would have created quite a sound, if you can visualize this, with the shofars blasting and the pitchers smashing. Then the sudden appearance of many lights would have been disorienting, okay? Because the lights were kind of inside the pitchers. So they smash, they make a huge sound and noise, and now all these lights appear. Lastly, remember I mentioned how key the friend's interpretation was. How many of you understand what scuttlebutt is? It's like in the army, scuttlebutt. So scuttlebutt is the idea. No, scuttlebutt really has more of an idea of when rumors go around the army, they spread really fast. The idea behind scuttlebutt is not just everybody knows rumors spread, but it's how fast that rumors can spread amongst an army. That's kind of the idea of scuttlebutt. So that's the speed at which rumors can spread around, even in a very large army. So it is no doubt that rumors about Gideon. Now, remember, how are they going to know his name? They might know that it's Israel that is across the valley from them, but they don't know who Gideon is. You know, half of Israel probably don't know who Gideon is at this point in time, you know. So rumors about Gideon by name and this kind of ominous dream would have spread like wildfire. Plus, they still believe that they are fighting against an army of 32,000. So the interpreting friend's dream held the phrase, that could be only the sword of Gideon, right? So they yell in verse 20, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. So the phrase that was yelled was based on what God gave Gideon upon overhearing the dream interpretation. Everybody understand that? So he's saying almost word for word the same exact phrase as this man's dream or interpretation of the dream, right? So it stands to reason that they know that there's some dream out there about the Israelites actually winning this battle from this man, this leader named Gideon. So you take all these kind of things into play here, and you kind of understand why they were so startled. And obviously the Lord's hand was in all this too. So all this noise, what they're yelling, this battle cry, the sudden lights that appear, this sets the whole camp into a panic, reminding many of the rumors they heard. Now, imagine being asleep after a hard day's work and hearing 300 shofars, breaking pots and sudden bright lights, and the shouts of what you think are 32,000 warriors attacking. The camels would have been spooked and stampeding. It was pure chaos. Now, thinking the enemy was attacking, they started to kill each other. Many years later, as the tale of this battle will be retold, I can just imagine how it went. So, you fought in the battle of Gideon against the Midianites, right? Yeah, sure. And you had only 300? Yeah, only 300. Yep, that's it. Wow, 300. That was awesome. You know, how many did they have? Oh, over 100,000. So, let me tell you what happened. We each took a shofar, a torch, and a pitcher. You didn't even need a sword? Nope. Then what did you do? Well, we blew our shofar, broke our pitcher, and yelled really, really loud. Wow. All right, then you drew your sword and killed a bunch of Midianites, right? Nope. We just stood there and watched, huh? Unbelievably, verse 21 says that every man just stood in his place and watched as the men started running for their lives. The 300, including Gideon, did not do anything in this original attack battle. These men were just killing each other. And those who weren't killing each other were fleeing for their lives. Now, they did give chase in the aftermath of this battle. And they could have possibly had a sword on them. I can't imagine they had much on them because they were carrying the torch, they have the shofar, they got the pitcher. So maybe they all had at least a sword. That's a different, yeah. I think they would have had weapons, but maybe not a lot. Maybe they did. Maybe they had makeshift weapons. It really doesn't tell us in the text. But this is a volunteer army. This is not a standing army, right? So that's probably a good, valid point Annabelle brought up, that they might not have had swords. They may have had other weapons. We know that the weapons were taken from them, especially the ones that went against the Philistines. And we know that for a fact the Philistines confiscated. Rose, you have a question?
Yeah, I was gonna say they, wouldn't they have to have some kind of weapons if they killed the two leaders, and they, cut their heads off?
Right, but that's not the Midian. That's not Gideon and his 300 that did that. And we're going to go over that. We'll go over that. I'll clarify. I'm going to go over the map and show you kind of what happens here. Because here's basically what happened. Yeah, so at this point in time, Gideon and his 300 didn't kill anybody. Anybody that's dead in this battle was done by the Midianites themselves. They killed each other. Not all of them, but in the panic, some men died. Now they start to flee. They're going to go south and they're going to go west because they're going to go back where they came from. All right? So it's just normal, natural. I'll show you on the map in a second. But I want you to think about this battle. He lowered their numbers from 32,000 to 300, which is 1% of the original amount. Then he only asked them to blow a shofar, break an earthenware vessel, and shout. That's it. That's all he did. God did the rest. 135,000 enemy soldiers against 300 not heavily armed man. A 450 to 1 ratio. Absolutely amazing. Now, verse 22 gives a list of cities as landmarks as the Midianites fled east and south. All those cities are in the area of Jabesh Gilead. If you look at the Jordan River, look this way, I have to go this way. On the eastern side over here, that's where Jabesh is. And you can't really see it on the map that well. But if you look on the other side of the Jordan River, you got the Mediterranean Sea over here. So I want you to look opposite of Mediterranean Sea. You see the Jordan down the middle? So there's a line of cities right by the Jordan River on the other side. So that's the path. So you have orange and green. Orange for the Midianite soldiers as they fled. You see them moving south, pretty much along the Jordan River. And the green is basically, that's Gideon's army, or 300, and we're going to talk about that, who follows him. All right, everybody got it? Now, at the very, very bottom, where the line kind of goes to this side, right? Up behind me, where it goes to the east side of the Jordan over here, that's where the Ephraimites, the tribe of Ephraim, cut off the fleeing Midianites. And we're going to talk about, and that where Oreb and Zeb is basically taken captive. Everybody see that map. So when I'm talking, you can look at the map and you can see them fleeing. The Ephraimites cut them off, coming over, and the rest of the Midianite horde finally make it across the Jordan, well, this way, and they go over here to the other side, to the east side from where they came. Everybody understand? Because the Midianites would have come from the east side of the Jordan. That's where their area is. Okay. All right, so that's the map. So thank you, Pastor. Keep that map up so they can see it. So Jabesh Gilead is over there on the east side of the Jordan. And I want you to make a mental note later about Jabesh as the city comes front and center in Judges 19 through 21. We're going to study the city of Jabesh Gilead. So Jabesh Gilead is actually on the east side, the other side of the Jordan, okay, the tribe of Gad. Now, I want to take time to point out the fact that these events and battles did not take place in a vacuum, meaning that real people and real lives had a stake in how this battle turned out. Even those in the hill country to the north and south of the Jezreel Valley, they all had a stake in all this. So the whole area would have been on high alert, including tribes on the east side of the Jordan, as 135 Midianites were on the move. And the point is that people knew that this battle was going on. Even if they didn't understand who was what and where, people knew there was movements through their territory. Gideon's original army was composed of men from the tribes of Manasseh, Zebulun, Asher, and Naphtali. And in verse 23, they were recalled. Okay? So before Gideon gave chase, Gideon didn't just get, the 300 didn't give chase right away. He recalled the other 32,000-ish. They were all recalled at this time. Now, they started to give chase in earnest once their numbers were bolstered. All right, and so that's where that comes in. So verse 23 makes it clear that he gathered the men again. And as the volunteers were coming back into the fight, Gideon sent messengers to Ephraim. And that's where we get a little confusion with Oreb and Zeb, Rose. He sends somebody, Pony Express, whatever. He sends somebody on a straight beeline there to try to get down to Ephraim. Now remember, people were more than enough, they were aware of what was going on here. So it's not that Ephraim did not know that there was a battle going on. So it might not have taken anybody very long to get down to Ephraim. So Ephraim, they were brought into action because the Midianites were fleeing south into their tribal lands. So it's natural. They're going south. And they were the lead tribe. Therefore, Ephraim was ready to pounce at a moment's notice, and they got that notice from Gideon. They were asked to take up positions at the many tributary and ford points along the Jordan River so that they could intercept and trap the fleeing Midianites. That was their job. Now, it shows the pink line coming over, right? It shows the pink line coming over to the Jordan River, but they would have, up and along the Jordan River for miles, they would have stationed soldiers to kind of stop up those fording points. Because remember, they're fleeing south, but those Midianites want to get over to east. They want to go back across the Jordan as fast as they can. So they're going to be key to stopping the Midianites fleeing across these fording points. They blocked and trapped the Midianites as far south as Beth Bara, as seen on our map. So where the pink line intersects with the green and orange line, that's Beth Bara. That's how far south. Look, that's pretty. They flew down pretty far, right? So those guys were running for quite some time, and I'm sure a lot of them didn't have their camels with them. Now, in verse 25, the Ephraimites captured two very important Midianite leaders by the name of Oreb and Zeb. And they executed these men, and then their heads were turned over to Gideon. It's basically what happens. Now, we have seen this before in Israel, where a place is named after an important event, like Bochim. Remember Bochim in Judges chapter 2? The angel of the Lord appeared to Israel, and they wept because of the message that the angel of the Lord gave them, and they named that place Bochim. So sometimes places are named after an event, but it's not necessarily they're executed near a city or by a landmark. So the executions did not really happen in a recognizable place or city, so they called the spot where each man was killed, where they killed Oreb, they called that the rock of Oreb. Maybe he was killed by a rock. And the winepress of Zeb, and maybe he was killed by a wine press or a local wine press. So that's what that means there. I guess maybe they had some grave markers in and around that area. And so that ends chapter 7. Now, does anybody have any questions over chapter 7, everything that we went over? Battle, confusion.
It reminds me of Joshua when they took Jericho with where they marched around and collapsed the wall, the chauffeur, just using the trumpets and the chauffeur and the jar.
Right.
It reminded me of Joshua and Jericho.
Right. When they blow the shofar and they marched around the city. I was thinking about Jericho also. That was another one, right? As Harry brought up Jericho, right? Jericho was another one where God's instructions were kind of counterintuitive. You didn't march around walls. As a matter of fact, you wanted to avoid walls as much as you could because people heap and throw things down off walls. So you don't want to stand on walls. Matter of fact, I think in Judges chapter 9, we're going to get a story where walls were involved. But anyway, yeah, counterintuitive, and you're ready to fight, and you're marching around Jericho, and you're not doing anything. What are we doing here, right? All right, and we're marching around one time each day, and then 7 times the last day, and then you're going to scream and shout? Yeah. No, it's a good point, because this is another battle where the Lord gives instructions that are counterintuitive, kind of odd and off, but really the point is, I'm the victor here. You aren't. I'm doing it. I'm the one who's leading you in a battle. I'm the one who's going to give you the victory, right? So good point. Yep, that's another one. Right? Any other questions over chapter 7?
So God gives us hope for this new administration. That's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to take an application. We're in a battle, right? And God's in control. God is going to have the victory. There's certainly things that we can apply in our own lives right now, because we're going to be in times of battle. I think this coming year and the years to come, yeah, we might need the Lord, to fight our battles for us like He always does. Yeah, and he's much more in charge and powerful than anything that the Democrats can do or any man can do to us, right? Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Now, the reason why I want to finish chapter 7 and move on to chapter 8 is because chapter 9 is long. It's like a 54 verse chapter. So I want to get into chapter 8 a little bit. And what I'm going to do next week is I'm going to get into chapter 9 a little bit as well, so that the following week we start out somewhere in the beginning of chapter 9. I don't have to go through 54 verses. I want to stick to a chapter a week. That keeps us moving along. All right? So I'm just going to read the first 4 verses. That's it. Just the first 4 verses of chapter 8. Okay, this occurs directly after they turn Oreb and Zeb over to Gideon. And it says, "The men of Ephraim said to him, 'What is this thing you have done to us, not calling us when you went to fight against Midian?' And they contended with him vigorously. But he said to them, 'What have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? God has given the leaders of Midian, Oreb and Zeb, into your hands. And what was I able to do in comparison with you?' Then their anger toward him subsided when he said that. Then Gideon and the 300 men who were with him came to the Jordan and crossed over, weary yet pursuing." To use a modern expression, the tribe of Ephraim were a bunch of prima donnas. They were the lead tribe in the north, and they certainly enjoyed this supremacy. Now, notice once again how there is no mention of Simeon and Judah in this passage. They're nowhere to be found. And, I tried to show this as an example to get you to see how much of a division there was amongst the tribes. No interaction at all with Simeon and Judah. Now, Ephraim enjoyed special status because Joshua was an Ephraimite. Ephraim also had been given birthright privileges over his older brother Manasseh and even replaced his uncle Reuben. So let's review what happened when Joseph visited his sick father Jacob, bringing with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And I want you to turn your Bibles back to Genesis chapter 48. Let's do a little history lesson. So, Joseph is second in command in Egypt, but his father is sick. So, Joseph is going to take a little bit of a break from his duties as second to Pharaoh, and he's going to come to visit his father. Now, when he visits his father, he's going to bring his 2 sons. Okay, and Joseph had 2 sons. The oldest is Manasseh, and the youngest is Ephraim. All right? So these aren't the tribes, these are the children. All right? Genesis chapter 48. Everybody there? Now it came about after these things that Joseph was told, "Behold, your father is sick." So he took his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, with him. And when it was told Jacob, "Behold, your son Joseph has come to you," Israel, which was Jacob's other name, collected his strength and sat up in the bed. Then Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. And he said to me, 'Behold, I will make you fruitful and numerous, and I will make you a company of peoples, and will give this land to your descendants after you for an everlasting possession. Now your 2 sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are mine.'" What did Israel just do? What did Jacob just do? He adopted them. Right. He adopted Manasseh and Ephraim. So, Manasseh and Ephraim at this point in time are equal footing with all the rest of his children. So even though this happened more legally, Joseph still was with his sons. Those two sons of Joseph were no longer legally Joseph's sons. Right. They were his grandsons. Now he made his grandsons his actual legal sons. So they didn't really belong to Joseph anymore. So he took Joseph's two sons.
Wasn't Jacob very elderly at that time?
He's very elderly. That's why Joseph went to see him, because he's very elderly and sick. So, verse 5, the adoption. But your offspring that have been born after them shall be yours. Okay, all the rest of the children are yours. They shall be called by the names of their brothers and their inheritance. Now, as for me, when I came from Padam, Rachel died to my sorrow in the land of Canaan on the journey, when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath. And I buried her there on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. Now, there's more than one Bethlehem in the land. That's why this Bethlehem, the one that Jesus was born in, was Bethlehem Ephratah. All right? Because they call it Ephrath. That's that specific Bethlehem. That was in Judah. And that's where Rachel was buried. So when Israel saw Joseph's sons, he said, "Who are these?" And Joseph said to his father, "These are my sons that you just took from me, whom God has given me here." So he said, "Bring them to me, please, that I may bless them." Now the eyes of Israel, which is Jacob, were so dim from age that he could not see. Then Joseph brought them close to him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face, and behold, God has let me see your children as well." Then Joseph took them from his knees and bowed with his face to the ground. Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left hand toward Israel's right, and brought them close to him. Okay? So let me give you an idea of what's going on here. Okay, this is my right hand. This is my left. The firstborn is going to get the greater blessing. I'm going to use my right dominant hand to bless the older. So Joseph naturally pushed the oldest, Manasseh, right here, so that Jacob could bless Manasseh first with the right hand, with the power hand. Ephraim is over here to Jacob's left. All right? So Jacob will bless Manasseh with the blessing of the firstborn. All right? So this is what happens. All right? Listen to what happens in verse 14. But Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, crossing his hands, although Manasseh was the firstborn. So he did that. So Ephraim, who is the secondborn, is getting the greater blessing with the right hand. This is the way he looked.
Sounds like Jacob and Esau.
It is. It is exactly like Jacob and Esau, right? So he blessed Joseph and said, "The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads. And may my name live on in them, and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac. And may they grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth." Look at verse 17. When Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on Ephraim's head, it displeased him. He was upset. And he actually grabbed his father's hands. He grasped his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head and to move it onto Manasseh's. He's trying to grab this hand and move it over. And Joseph said to his father, "Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head." But his father refused, said, "I know, my son, I know. He shall become a people, and he shall also be great. However, this younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations." And he blessed them that day, saying, "But you, Israel, shall pronounce blessings, saying, May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. So, two things happen in this chapter that have a bearing on our study that I wanted to go over. One, Ephraim and Manasseh were adopted by Jacob, thus making them a double portion for Joseph. So out of all the sons, who got the double portion? Joseph did, through his 2 children that Jacob adopted. So he ended up getting the double portion to the child he wanted to do that for. So he got his way. And now this was legal because, if you remember, Reuben lost the double portion and the blessing of the firstborn when he slept with his father's concubine. So Reuben lost that. And so he lost that double portion, and he lost the blessing of the firstborn. So he was able to give that to Joseph through his 2 sons. 2, even though Ephraim, the tribe, were a bunch of prima donnas, their blessing in Genesis 48 was being fulfilled starting here in Judges. So I can't tell you whether God gave Jacob direct instruction with regards to his hands, to his hand placement, but I do know that God's will was done in the future of these 2 tribes, is the idea here. Furthermore, Ephraim will not only have precedence over Manasseh, but over all his brothers in the north, as you'll see. When the kingdom eventually split after the reign of Solomon, the north also became known as Ephraim, and the south, Judah. Both areas are named after these 2 most powerful tribes. Really is how that shakes out. And so that has a lot to do with our chapter and with our study in Judges. Anyway, back to our chapter here in Judges chapter 8. So in verse 1, the leaders of Ephraim are not happy. Their complaint was that Gideon did not include them in the call to battle. And really, they were right. They were left out. But here he is, Gideon, tired and weary from battle and giving chase to the enemy. And you see how far that chase was. They came from a long way. And here he is, tired, he's weary. The anointed shofet of God and the leaders of Ephraim were upset because in their eyes, Gideon broke some sort of protocol that didn't really exist. Why? Because the idea is that they felt their status earned them the right to not only be consulted before anything grand was undertaken, how dare they be left out, was their attitude, but also they had to be at the head of the line for the blessings that come from victory. And what do armies get? What are the blessings that armies get from victory? Those blessings are called spoil, right? So the spoil from winning these battles could be very lucrative to the tribes involved. Ephraim could be left out of this, and that was a problem. Added to all this was the fact that Shiloh and Bethel, 2 of the most hallowed places in the Promised Land, well, they were in the territory and controlled by Ephraim, which left basically the religious center right in their territory. Plenty of reasons for arrogance and pride from this tribe. So in verse 2, and I'll explain the verse to you because it could be a little confusing, Gideon does very well in massaging their egos. That's what he had to do. He chose a wise and diplomatic response. Using the typical farming metaphor, he says this, that the leftover or gleaned, the leftovers of the glean of any crop is the ones that fall to the ground. They're left over for the poor. So this is what he says. The leftover, the ones that fell off the vine and now lay on the ground, the leftover grapes of Ephraim are better than the best crops of his clan. And he named his own clan Abiezer, right? In other words, although it may appear that his harvest of victory over Midian without the help of Ephraim was greater, although it appears greater, the fact is that their gleaning or their mop-up operation was a key and much more important because total victory would not have been achieved without it. Am I making sense here? So he's saying what you did in capturing these 2 men and cleaning up and this mop-up, this really won the battle. So basically, we couldn't have done it without you, is what he's basically saying. Gideon was ultimately helping Ephraim save face. And we talked about this before, and we'll talk about this again. Intertribal, tribe versus tribe. That warfare was always a possibility during this time. One tribe fighting another tribe happened, and it was always a possibility. In this case, there could have been a battle again with Gideon and his 300 against the Ephraimites. So it's always a possibility. So before we end done this book, we're going to see this so familiar possibility of warring tribes that is kind of a staple of tribalism we talked about. That's how people pull their hair out in tribalism. They could easily be warring one moment, then forgiving each other as brothers in the next. That's how it works. Remember, I gave that example of when we send our troops into Afghanistan, what's had us pull our hair out is because we back one tribe over another in a war, and we arm them, and we train them, and the next moment they make up as brothers, and they're no longer fighting each other. And we're wondering why we've just armed and trained one tribe over another. And they just make up. What's that? We do that. Or we've done that in the past. That's why we have trouble with places like Afghanistan, because our military goes in, trains one tribe against another because of an ideology, or because one tribe may be weaker than the other. For whatever our reasons are, we train one, we back one, we arm them, we train them, right? Get them ready, and they fight, and the next thing you know, they're making peace. And we went through all that, and now they're brothers again because they have this similar heritage. They come from the same, family tree. So we've always had problems. With tribalism, you could be fighting one minute, and then your brothers the next. And we're going to see that in the book. So, to end, why am I spending extra time on Ephraim? Because we are going to see the same behavior from this tribe during the time of Jephthah in Judges chapter 12. So in a few chapters, we're going to see this same sort of behavior from Ephraim again. So after reminding them of the importance of capturing Oreb and Zeb, they were appeased. Well, war averted. And we weren't going to have any trouble.
Sounds like Gideon was a smooth talker, just like his dad.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. When you think about it, Annabelle said Gideon was a smooth talker, just like his dad. Right. That's right. He probably learned that skill from his father, he talked those men down. I didn't even think about that. That's a great connection. And Gideon just talked the whole tribe of Ephraim, or at least the leaders of Ephraim down, who would have approached him. Yeah. He was a smooth talker. He said the right things. They were appeased, and he helped them save face, and a war was averted. And I just wanted to make sure that you guys understood that at that point in time, there could have been a war between tribes. There's a distinct possibility. That is crazy to think about it, but this is how tribalism worked. So Gideon's good words stopped the battle, a possible battle from breaking up. And we will pick this up next week as Gideon, tired and weary, he gives chase after the two kings of Midian who are on the east side of the Jordan. So next week we're going to go over, see the line where all the lines intersect, and then the lines travel over to the east. So that's what we're going to be reading about next week, what happened as Gideon and his 300 travel east. Ephraim does not go with him. No, I'm sorry. I keep saying Gideon is 300. At this point in time, he probably has the 32,000 with him, or some, like numbers. So he's going with the full brunt of his army to try to capture and get these two kings and whoever is left in this battle. That's next week. Manasseh is a king later named Manasseh who was an evil. Yeah, he was evil. He was a king of Judah. But that's not the same that's different from the tribe of Manasseh that we're studying. This is Manasseh the tribe. That's Manasseh the king. Yeah. Any questions over anything we went over chapter 7?
The two leaders of Oreb and Zeb, it said they executed these men and then their heads were turned over to Gideon.
In other words, before Ephraim complained and griped, as I went over, they did give the heads of Orb and Zeb over to Gideon and the army. They just brought their heads, not their bodies. And then once they did that, then they griped and you know, they had their complaint with the Gideon afterwards for not being called. So that's, yeah. So, yeah.
Like tribes and clans, I mean, they were basically all brothers though, right?
They were.
You know, like,
Yeah, some of the things I'm trying to establish because there are things that really, really confused me when I first read Judges. And when I first read Judges, I said, number one, isn't this Israel? Aren't they called Israel? Where's this nation? You know, and so if you think of them as a nation, you get confused because they're so divided. And they're not a nation. They're a group of tribes, and they're very loosely confederate. Then you start reading Samuel and others, and you say, even if you read the story or the life of Saul, and you're still going to see a ton of divisions in Samuel. Ton. Saul in no way united the country, even though he was king. Not even close. This is all Israel. But in the time of the Judges, they're just a bunch of tribes. And then you see that they start to be divided. That's why we don't hear a thing, not a peep from Judah and Simeon, because they're so divided, nothing that goes on in the north they're ever involved in at this point in time. We're a couple centuries in, and Judah and Simeon have separated themselves. And then you barely get any participation from any tribes from the east of the Jordan. That's Gad, the other half tribe of Manasseh, and Reuben. And they're barely involved. And so these separations and divisions already occur. Then you have tribalism. And we're going to see, especially at the end, the last 5 chapters of Judges are going to be great. You're going to see them spat. They're going to almost annihilate a tribe. Then they say, oh, our brothers, we don't want to lose our tribe in Israel. And so they repent and they try to make it up. And I mean, you can see some odd things occur. And when they occur, I want you guys armed, that you understand tribalism. You understand that you can in no way think of Israel as a nation at this point. You got to know that the priesthood has been disrupted and bankrupt. They're not learning the word. They don't know their scriptures. They don't know their God. They're following after idols. I mean, just a mess, a nightmare that occurs. And these events kind of set the stage for the kings and the final time where Assyria takes the northern kingdom and Babylon takes the southern kingdom. Final discipline.
When we talk about Israel as a nation, right? And we went back to Genesis, and Jacob's name was changed to Israel.
Right.
When we read that, it said Israel, right? So Jacob's name was changed to Israel.
Right, and they were so divided that the northern kingdom was named also Israel. It was Israel and Judah. David was king for 7.5 years in the south before the north would accept King David. 7.5 years in Hebron. Why? Because the north did not accept him. And I'm telling you, they had to talk Benjamin into it. Because Benjamin had nothing to do with David. Because Benjamin, oh, they're all brothers. Benjamin and Judah, they're brothers. No, David killed Saul. No, he didn't kill Saul. Saul died in battle. But you know how that goes. So Benjamin held a grudge.
Well, then came along Absalom, David's son, and he tried to take over the kingdom.
Right.
So, I mean, it's just,
And when David was leaving, this guy, what his name? Shimei? Was his name Shimei? Did I get that right? Right? He's hurling curses at David. He's letting David have it. Who? He was a Benjamite. He's a Benjamite. So David was an offense to him. And that's after David reigned for all those years. So even when he brought the kingdom together, after the 7.5 years in Hebron, they still had divisions among themselves. You know, based on tribalism in this culture. So I want you to see all those things. And we're going to get to some really weird stuff at the very end of Judges so that we're not like, whoa, what the heck is going on here? We kind of have an idea of really how this works. What is tribalism? How are these divisions started? You know, what is the thinking? Where's the priesthood? Now, I'll tell you another one to do. I'll give you this. Read anything. Read the book of Leviticus and then read Judges. You start to read Judges and you're like, they're not supposed to do that. And then you go over here and you go, what are they? They're not supposed to do that. I mean, you're constantly like, wait. And you realize how far they fell, and they're not following the law of Moses. But we learned last week that Gideon has an idea of his culture, the history, the background. He knows who Moses and Joshua is, the parting of the Red Sea. He knows all the stories. They have not totally turned, and he's not ignorant of his history, background, their knowledge, the true and living God. But it's what they know of God has been corrupted at this point. And the priesthood is basically bankrupt. I mean, there's just no working priesthood. And we're going to see a little bit of that. Any other questions? Anything over chapter 7, moving into chapter 8 for next week?
Killing each other then.
What's that?
They're really killing each other.
They're really killing each other?
Yeah.
They have. They've fought in the past, and we're going to see even in Judges, they're going to fight against each other. They're going to have some problems. And you would think they have their enough on their hands with, the nations that surround them, but that doesn't really matter. Sometimes intertribal wars occur because they're offended. There was no gross misconduct. They were just simply offended by another tribe. So that's tribalism. It's the way it goes. Any other questions?
We see it today, like, we say how, like, it applies to us, and I'm talking about, like, family conflicts. Like, I know brothers that haven't talked to a brother in, my two uncles, they didn't talk to each other for 15 years.
Right.
You know what I mean? Where,
Right. Sometimes the offense between two family members is even worse than like two friends having the same thing occur.
Israel is a nation, they had feuds and they didn't see eye to eye on,
Yeah, absolutely.
that inner conflict.
Yeah, and that's probably a point too. Yeah, like, fighting with your family. It's a little bit easier and more volatile when you're fighting with a family than just a friend at times, or somebody you're not as close with, yeah.
Yeah, but then when rubber hits the road,
Then you just hug and make up.
with your brother.
Yeah, we can kind of get the idea. Any other questions or anything I wasn't clear on from this chapter? Everybody good? All right, let's...
I want to say thank you, DG. Awesome job in this study, man. I mean, your teaching is,
Good, I'm glad you're enjoying.
it's been a blessing.
Yeah, I gotta, sometimes I wonder, I'm hoping that I'm not as too dry, just facts, reading too much. I hope you're getting a little bit of spiritual boost from this as well to see the Lord work.
Well, one thing is, when you read this, like, not really in detail, you can get lost in this stuff. So with you breaking it down like that, I personally, I understand it a lot more.
I want to make sure you understand the facts and you can see the language, and that's kind of like, I want you to get the broad brush.
Like saying, well, what are they saying here? You know what I mean? So, yeah, it's all good.
Yeah, I want to. That's what I hope. I hope that this study really does that for you. I want you to be able to read the book of Judges now. You could go back and read the first 7 and not be so confused anymore. You say, "Oh, I know what that," and just have an idea of what's going on, and can read for yourselves.
I don't know if this is the right question at this time, but when does Israel all unite and fight as one? When Jesus was born, or?
When Israel unites.
Yeah, what do they?
Probably they united against when they were with David. It wasn't a united kingdom, but there was a lot of squabbles. And they were pretty united again with Solomon. I mean, Solomon consolidated it and had a lot of peace. Now, the Lord brought that peace because Solomon asked for wisdom. And the Lord really blessed him, even though he went wayward, because he married too many foreign women. And that is another story. And so as long as Solomon was alive, it was okay. But when Solomon died, it didn't take long for the kingdom to divide. And then it was over. Once the kingdom divided, Jeroboam got the north into idolatry. And from then on out, it was really pretty much ball game. There was just no bringing them back. And they had not one single good king in the north. And it was really basically because Jeroboam so badly corrupted their worship that they never recovered the north. So they were divided from there on out. So when Jesus returns in the millennium, then we can say all of Israel has been united. And when the true and living, when Jesus takes his throne, then they're going to be together. So they've been squabbling ever since they came into the land, you know. It's never been a lot of peace between them. All right, good. I'm glad you're enjoying this study. Any questions? Remember, write down your questions. If I haven't covered something that you were thinking about, or I haven't covered a thought that you had, I really want you to share your thoughts. So read ahead, read chapter 8, all right, for next week. All right? All right, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I just thank you for your word and thank you for this study. I just thank you for all those who come out and open their hearts and mind and who are so hungry to learn the word. Just love the church and the people of this church who just put your word front and center and know the importance of your word and learning these principles, Lord. And just I'm so thankful and blessed to get the privilege to be able to speak in front of them and to teach. It's just quite a blessing and an honor for me, Lord. So I just pray for all those who are here and all those who are at home, those who tuned into the study, Lord. May you bless them this week, and may they keep all these things in their hearts and mind this week and use it in their walk with you. And I pray all this as everyone goes out. Keep them safe. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.